The processing queue had 17 souls ahead of me, and I tallied them because that's what happens when your brain gets rewired for survival. 17 bodies, 3 potential choke points, 2 unsecured access panels. The customs bay on Kessler Station smelled like recycled oxygen, and the faint metallic tang of 1,000 species trying not to breathe on each other. The ceiling panels glowed a sickly beige, the kind of light that makes everyone look vaguely ill. Behind their reinforced counters, the immigration officers operated scanners that cost more than my hometown's annual infrastructure budget. I placed my carry-all between my boots and practiced the art of standing still. The beings ahead of me dressed like they wanted their tax brackets to precede them. A Velian trade delegation floated past in chromatic robes that rippled through the spectrum like oil slicks designed by interior decorators. A cluster of Sheth merchants vibrated in frequencies too low for universal translators to bother with. Apparently their gossip wasn't meant for outsiders. Near the front, 2 Doran diplomats studied me the way you'd study a menu item written in a language you don't speak. I studied the scanner architecture instead. Military-grade HRD-9 model. Those could trace a thread's dye lot back to its planetary origin. I'd once watched one flag a medical gauze roll as a bioweapon for 37 minutes before a supervisor finally overrode the alert. The line lurched forward, I followed, my coat followed me. That's the thing about this coat. It's been everywhere I've been for 12 years, minus a few gaps. Earth Defense Corps, 4th Planetary Expeditionary. Standard issue. The color of wet concrete or bureaucratic indifference. Colors designed to outlast their wearers. The right shoulder bore a scorch mark that industrial solvents couldn't touch. The right sleeve hung a centimeter shorter than the left, thanks to a field medic named Rivera, who'd reattached it during the retreat. Working one-handed, running on caffeine in spite, doing the best work of her life under the worst conditions of hers. The rank insignia were gone. I'd cut them off myself 3 years ago, sitting on a cot in a traveler's hostel not unlike the one I'd be sleeping in tonight. I kept the coat. The scanner chirped when I stepped up. The customs official ran his wand over my bag, my coat, my bag again. Then he stopped. His antennae twitched. He scanned the coat a second time. His translator unit spat out flat, bureaucratic English. Garment flagged as degraded material. Declare origin planet. Earth, I said. The acoustics of the room changed. Not silence, more like a pressure differential. 17 different life forms recalibrating their threat assessments and landing on me. The Velians edged sideways, not rudely, just the careful distance you give a stray animal that might bite. The Doran diplomats exchanged glances that needed no translation because unease is universal. The customs officer peered at his screen, then at my coat, then back at his screen. Purpose of visit, he said. Procurement. Water reclamation components. He stamped my transit visa with the weary efficiency of someone who'd decided I wasn't worth the paperwork. As I gathered my bag and moved through the gate, his translator caught the tail end of a comment to his colleague. Enjoy your stay. Disposable goods. I walked to the berth assignment desk, collected my room code, navigated the corridors, found the door. The berth was exactly the dimensions they always are. 1 bunk, 1 shelf, 1 wall hook. The hook was for the coat. I hung it there and sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at it for a long moment. The scorch mark. Rivera's uneven stitching. The ghost outlines where the patches used to live. There was a 5-hour window before the promenade merchants opened. I set a timer. I lay down. I didn't sleep through most of it, but that was fine. I was well practiced at waiting. The ceiling was that same sickly beige, with a scuff near the air vent that looked like a boot print. Proof that someone before me had also found the berth exactly the dimensions they always are. I thought about the water parts. A list of 6 items cross-referenced against 5 vendors, prices locked in before departure. The township of Oakhaven had pooled 14 months of trade surplus to bankroll this trip. 8,000 people whose drinking water ran through a filtration grid, held together with salvage and stubbornness. They'd sent me because I knew how to navigate neutral trade stations without causing international incidents. That was the job description, unofficial as it was. Outside, Kessler Station hummed, ships docking, currencies transferring, the mundane machinery of a galaxy that had, over the past 5 years, mostly moved on from Earth's existence. I pulled the coat off the hook and folded it at the foot of the bunk where I could see it. The timer went off. I stood, grabbed the coat, put it on. The sleeve caught at the shoulder the way it always did. I picked up my bag and went to find water filtration parts. The promenade on Kessler Station was the kind of engineered space designed to make you feel simultaneously insignificant and under financial pressure. Vaulted ceilings that made the air feel thin. Vendor stalls curving in concentric rings around the station's central axis, which meant walking a straight line would eventually return you to your starting point. A philosophical statement about consumerism I didn't have time to appreciate. I didn't walk in a straight line. I had a list and I worked it methodically. The way you work procurement when the credits belong to 8,000 people who can't afford waste. First component came from a Velian tech stall in Ring 3. Standard filtration housing grade C. The vendor quoted me 18% above market. I pointed at his displayed price tag. He recalculated based on supply chain volatility. I pointed out that the item was physically in his inventory, sitting on his shelf. He recalculated again. The price came down, not all the way, but far enough. I paid, pocketed the component, moved on. Second and third items were at a consolidated parts dealer near Central Ring. The vendor, a Sheth female with calculating eyes, quoted me 32% over listed price and watched me with the expression of someone who'd already decided I wouldn't argue. I argued politely with documentation, market rate comparisons from 7 independent trading hubs. She matched the display price. I packed the components with the careful reverence of someone carrying things that matter because they did. Fourth vendor. That's when the adolescents appeared. Sheth juveniles travel in packs, a universal constant that requires no translation. There were 5 of them, maybe 15 in human years, maybe 22. Age doesn't cross species cleanly. They wore the kind of clothing young beings wear when they're desperate to look like they belong somewhere cooler than reality. They noticed my coat. I noticed them noticing it. There's a specific texture to being stared at by strangers who've decided you're entertainment. You can feel it, can't you? Like sandpaper dragged gently across the back of your neck. Not painful, just constant. They started tailing me at about 25 feet. Not threatening, theatrical. Their translator unit fed me fragments in flat English. Earth creature, look at the outer layer. Is that standard issue for their sanitation workers? I kept walking. Do the burns come pre-installed or do you add them yourself? I stopped at a kiosk selling polished navigation orbs I had no use for. Picked one up, turned it in my palms. It was fist-sized and frictionless and cold, calibrated for ships I'd never pilot. I held it for a while. The adolescents drifted closer. One of them said something the translator rendered as vintage war rag. Then, dirt planet souvenir. Then, why does it have scorch marks? Did she try to cook in it? Another voice. Maybe Earth is so impoverished they cook in their outerwear. The navigation orb vendor watched me handling his merchandise and said nothing. He looked at the teenagers, then at me, and performed the calculation that this wasn't his situation to adopt. I set the orb down, walked to the next stall. The adolescents followed. The promenade was crowded with other beings going about their commerce, and they flowed around us the way water flows around a stone, without acknowledgement. A Kel child pointed at me, and the parent redirected the child's hand without making eye contact. I found the vendor who was supposed to have the 4th component. He was out of stock. Directed me to a secondary dealer at the far end of the outer ring. I walked there. The teenagers were still behind me. Closer now, taking hollows with their personal devices, framing shots of the coat, comparing images among themselves. Translator fragments drifted through. Caption, War Hero. Laughter. Caption, Survivor of the Laundry Cycle. The laugh that followed was the specific frequency of young beings performing for each other. I'd heard that laugh before. Different species, different stations, different coats on different people who were also just trying to complete an errand and go home. I was nearly at the outer ring when one of them stepped in front of me. He was taller than the others, the kind of recent height gain that gives adolescents temporary delusions of authority. He stood in my path and raised his device, and made a production of photographing the coat at close range. His translator said, for his friend's benefit, the species that believed it could reach the stars in a singed sleeping garment. His friends made approving sounds behind him. He reached out and grabbed the right sleeve, the shorter one, Rivera's sleeve, gave it a small tug, examined the stitching, looked at his friends and said something the translator gave as, "Did someone sew this with their eyes shut?" A pause. I looked at his hand on my sleeve. The medic who'd reattached that sleeve had been named Rivera. She'd worked 11 hours straight during the retreat without a break. Left-handed, fast, precise in all the ways that actually counted. The stitching was uneven because she'd been running on adrenaline and the specific ferocity of someone who'd decided that everyone in front of her was going to see sunrise. She made it. Rivera made it. Marcus didn't. Chen didn't. I removed the teenager's hand from my sleeve the way you remove something that's wandered where it shouldn't, without drama, the way you clear a path. He stepped back. I said, "All right then." Walked past him. Found the secondary vendor. Found the fourth component. Paid the listed price without negotiation because the vendor, an elderly Kel who'd probably seen empires rise and fall from this promenade, quoted me the correct number up front and bagged the part without ceremony. I packed it with the others. My bag was heavier now, the good kind of heavy, the kind with purpose in it. I checked my departure window. 3 hours, found the atrium, sat down, ordered something the station menu called coffee, and that resembled coffee the way a photograph resembles a person. Pulled out my documentation and began reviewing return logistics. The promenade noise filtered in from the corridor. Commerce voices. The click and hum of a station that didn't know or care what a fourth expeditionary coat meant. I drank the not-quite coffee. It was acceptable. The atrium was the first space on the station that felt designed for existing in, rather than transiting through. High ceiling. Tables spaced for conversations that weren't anyone else's business. A long observation window along one wall showing the outer docks, ships arriving and departing. The slow geometric ballet of interstellar traffic. I picked a table against the wall, not flush with the window, set slightly back, with sight lines to both the main entrance and the corridor leading to the docking rings. You don't unlearn that. You just stop explaining it. The food I ordered was described as a grain bowl. It was grains in a bowl. Whatever grain it was warm and had been seasoned with something that wasn't quite anything, but also wasn't nothing. I was hungry, and it was food, and those two facts were sufficient. I spread my documentation across the table beside the bowl. Procurement records, transit clearances, the return cargo manifest that needed finalizing before I could book the water parts through Freight Lock. I worked through it the way paperwork rewards, slowly, patiently, without hope of finishing early. For about 45 minutes, the atrium was peaceful. Then the military delegation docked. I heard them before I saw them. The sound a Kel tactical unit makes moving through civilian corridors is distinctive, not loud. It's an organized, distributed weight of movement that registers differently from crowd noise, a frequency your hindbrain processes before your ears catch up. I didn't look up from my documentation, but I was aware of them entering from the main corridor. Multiple bodies, high-ranking from the footstep spacing and the way ambient conversation dropped and repositioned itself. The way a room recalibrates when something has changed its gravitational center. I kept working. The grain bowl was mostly gone. I was reviewing freight lock procedures when someone stopped near my table. Not passing. Stopping. Then the sound of additional individuals orienting themselves. A loose semicircle forming somewhere behind me. I set down my stylus. The Kel lieutenant was young in the particular way military officers are young when they've risen faster than their judgment has matured, a specific kind of youth that transcends species. He wore decorations, real ones, which meant he'd earned his rank in the field. That didn't change what he was doing right now. What he was doing right now was performing. His subordinates were the audience. The atrium was the stage. I was the prop. He examined my coat, took his time with it, then examined me. Then, for his audience's benefit, spoke at length. The translator unit rendered his words with the flat precision of official-grade military translation software, producing approximately, "I had heard rumors that Earth sent soldiers to the Reach during the expansion hostilities. I confess I found the notion difficult to credit. It seemed improbable that a species so recently interstellar would attempt operations in a theater that experienced forces had already assessed and abandoned. Yet here stands evidence that the rumors may have foundation. Here stands what Earth dispatched." He gestured at my coat. "Soldiers in costuming." One of his subordinates made a low sound that needed no translation. "I am curious," the lieutenant continued, his translator giving each syllable full weight, "whether Earth is aware of how its representatives are received beyond its own star system, whether anyone has delivered that information in person." He tilted his head. "I imagine the journey must be quite taxing for such a minor species in such a weathered coat." He was good, I'll give him that. Controlled, precise. Every word calibrated for maximum effect, entertaining his unit while staying technically within boundaries that could be filed as diplomatic friction rather than incident. I looked at my grain bowl. It was empty. I'd finished it during the first half of his speech. The spoon rested in the bowl at roughly a 45-degree angle. The bowl had a small chip on its rim, lower right quadrant. I picked up my stylus, set it down, looked at the lieutenant, said nothing. The nothing lasted about 8 seconds, then, "Huh." I picked up my stylus again. Something shifted in the lieutenant's posture. Fractional, his expectations recalibrating. He'd anticipated protest or silence or embarrassment. What he'd gotten was a woman who said, "Huh," and returned to her paperwork. His unit was watching him, and they didn't know what to do with that either. He opened his mouth. The atrium changed. Not loudly, no announcement. It changed the way a room changes when something enters it that carries more mass than everything else in it combined, and everything else knows it and adjusts. I felt it before I saw it. That same frequency from the corridor, but different now. Slower, more deliberate. Not the distributed movement of a unit, but the specific tread of a single individual who's been in enough rooms to know that rooms arrange themselves around her. The lieutenant went still. His unit went still. I looked up. The general wasn't what I'd expected, a fact I noted and then filed away because expectations aren't useful data. She was ancient the way things get when they've endured. Her uniform was dress formal but worn with the ease of someone who'd stopped thinking about it, the way you stop thinking about your own skin. Her decorations were extensive. She wasn't looking at the lieutenant. She was looking at my coat, specifically at the right shoulder, the scorch mark. She'd stopped walking. She was 10 feet from my table, and she'd stopped and she was reading the coat the way you read something you've been searching for. Her aide stood behind her, datapad extended, trying twice, then 3 times to get her attention. She wasn't taking it. The lieutenant had, in the span of about 12 seconds, become significantly less interested in performing for his unit. The general's eyes moved from the scorched shoulder to the sleeve, Rivera's sleeve, to the empty spaces where the patches had been, then finally to my face. I looked back at her. She spoke to the lieutenant, 1 sentence in Kel. The translator lagged half a step behind, producing, "Step aside." But the lieutenant's secondary eyelids reacted before the translation finished, which told me the original Kel had been considerably more specific than 2 words. He stepped back. A great deal of the air went out of his performance. The general crossed to my table. She didn't ask to sit. She stood at the edge and looked at the coat one more time. I thought she was going to speak. She didn't. Not yet. The moment was very quiet. Her aide stood at a respectful distance, datapad still extended, now clearly uncertain what was happening. I picked up my cold, not quite coffee and finished it. The general sat down. She didn't speak immediately. She sat with the straightness of someone who doesn't slouch even when exhausted. And she was exhausted. I could see it. The kind that lives in your jaw tension, and the particular stillness of eyes that have processed more than they'd like to still be processing. Her name, I'd learn later, was General Veer of the Kel 2nd Command Division, 32 years active. More engagements than her official record listed, which is true of most generals worth the designation. Right now she was studying the scorch mark on my coat's shoulder. I let her look. I'd had 3 years to acclimate to people looking at it, but usually the looking had a different quality. Usually it was the looking of people who didn't know what they were seeing. This was the looking of someone who did. 4th Expeditionary, she said. Not a question. Yeah, I said. Her translator was a high-grade command unit, the kind that handles small silences with more grace than standard models. When she spoke again, the English it produced was almost the right texture. She said, "The scorch mark, the reach, yes." Yeah. "The communication network failed at hour 3, she said. "We lost contact with all Earth units in that sector. Our assessment at the time was that no extraction was viable." She paused. "We withdrew our forces from the perimeter at hour 7. I looked at the empty grain bowl. The chip on its rim, lower right quadrant. Someone had used this bowl many times without it breaking completely, which seemed like a reasonable thing to notice. We held until hour 12, I said. Signal came back at 11. No one came." She closed her secondary eyelids for just a moment. 7 of us came back, I said. I didn't say the rest. I didn't list the ones who didn't. There were names on that list I'd said enough times in enough contexts, and this wasn't the context for them. The room already knew. The general was quiet for a moment that had weight to it. Then she turned and looked at the lieutenant, who was standing with his unit at a distance, suggesting he understood he'd wandered into a situation he'd catastrophically miscalculated. She spoke to him in Kel. Her translator unit produced an English version, and I noticed with mild interest that the translator seemed to work slightly harder on this one, as if there were Kel concepts being employed without clean human equivalents. What it produced was, "You addressed this individual with mockery in a public space. You used the code of the 4th Expeditionary as an object of entertainment. I would like you to understand what you were looking at when you did that." She paused. The lieutenant's posture had changed significantly from its performance configuration. He was standing like a much younger and less confident officer. His unit had redistributed themselves, which is what units do when the commanding energy in a room is no longer coming from their immediate superior. The general continued. The 4th Expeditionary held the outer boundary of the reach perimeter for 11 hours after all communication infrastructure collapsed. With no resupply, no extraction capability, no confirmation that any Allied forces were aware of their situation. They held the line because the reach perimeter, if breached, would have opened 3 civilian population corridors to uncontrolled incursion. She didn't look at me while she said this. Her eyes stayed on the lieutenant. The Kel 2nd Command at hour 7 assessed the perimeter as unsalvageable and withdrew our forces to secondary positions. This was the correct tactical decision given the information we had. She paused. We were wrong about the information we had. The lieutenant wasn't making any sounds. The signal that re-established contact at hour 11 came from a single Earth handheld unit. It was operated by a 7-person unit that had by that point held the perimeter alone for 8 hours. Their communication read as follows. She paused. I wondered how she had that information, then stopped wondering. Generals with 32 years in the field tend to know things they've spent 32 years learning. The message was, still here, perimeter intact, appreciate pickup when convenient. One of the lieutenant's subordinates made a sound. The general said, when convenient. She let that sit in the room. A species that had been holding an undefended perimeter alone for 8 hours, with no communication, no knowledge of whether any Allied force was still operational, no certainty of extraction, sent a message that said, when convenient. Another pause. You laughed at that coat, she said. The lieutenant was the kind of still that comes from having been very loud and then having the context of that loudness rewritten entirely in front of an audience. That coat, the general said, has been to the reach. The scorch mark on its shoulder is from the incursion breach at hour 8, when the perimeter was temporarily lost, and one individual pulled it back. I am looking at the physical evidence of that on the garment in front of me, and I would ask you to also look at it and consider what you decided it was worth mocking. The atrium was very quiet. Not the quiet of a room where nothing is happening. The quiet of a room where everyone has collectively agreed to remain very still, so as not to disturb whatever is currently occurring. You will go, the general said. You will find somewhere in your current understanding of yourself the appropriate quantity of smallness to feel about what you did in this room. When you have found it, you will return to me, and you will explain what you found in detail, and I will decide if it is sufficient. The lieutenant said something short and low in Kel that the translator caught as, "Yes, General." He left. His unit redistributed and followed in the particular way of people trying to exit a space without appearing to flee it. The atrium exhaled. I watched the empty space where they'd been. Then I looked at the general. She'd turned back to the table, and her expression had settled into something else, something quieter. "I apologize," she said, "for their conduct." "Okay," I said. She looked at me. "Not a small apology," she said carefully. "A formal one, on behalf of the Kel military, for the conduct of those under my command." I looked at her. This woman who had 32 years in the field and had been at the Reach, at least at its perimeter, at least in the hours before the withdrawal, who had arrived at this atrium table 5 years late for a conversation, and was sitting across from a woman with a cold grain bowl and a worn coat, offering something formal. It settled into me the way formal things settle when they're real. Quietly, without announcement. I said, "All right. We failed to acknowledge what happened at the Reach," she said. "We withdrew and we filed our reports and we documented the tactical decision, and we did not, as an institution, stop to account for what was accomplished there. What you accomplished." "We," I said. She waited. "7 of us," I said. "Not me." "7. "Yes," she said. 7. I looked at the window. A freighter was moving into the docking ring. Slow, enormous, deliberate, with the patience of something that has a great deal of mass and has made peace with that. "Marcus Webb," I said. "Elena Vasquez, Sarah Chen, David Okonkwo, Rivera, first name Maria, James Kim, and me." She let the names exist in the air for a moment. "The other 7, she said. "They made it back. All 7 of us made it back. We lost 6 on the way to the perimeter before the signal went down." "I know," she said. The way she said it told me she'd done more than know. She'd learned the names. At some point, 5 years ago or since, she'd gone back and read the full records and learned the names of 6 people who'd gone to the Reach and not come home. I looked at her. She looked at the coat. After a moment, she said, "The patches. You removed them." "Yeah." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. It wasn't a question I'd been asked before, not directly. People who knew what the patches meant didn't ask. People who didn't know weren't asking about the patches, they were asking about the coat, and the question was always something else underneath. "Felt right," I said. She nodded slowly. Not the nod of someone accepting an insufficient answer. The nod of someone who already knew the answer and had just wanted to hear it from the source. The aide reappeared at the general's side. Datapad still extended. The aide's expression was the expression of someone carrying a very full container very carefully and hoping the room would stabilize soon. The general took the datapad without looking at it, glanced at the contents, handed it back and spoke briefly in Kel. The aide retreated. "How long are you on the station?" the general asked. 2.5 hours, I said. "Departure at the next scheduled freight window." She nodded. "Then I will not take more of your time than is right." She looked at the coat once more. "One more thing." "Sure," I said. "The unit that held the Reach perimeter," she said. "The 4th Expeditionary. They should have been cited, formally recognized by the Joint Allied Command. That did not happen. The political situation after the expansion conflict was complicated, and recognition was one of the things placed in a queue and moved back repeatedly. I said nothing. "I have made a formal recommendation," she said. 4 times in the last 5 years, that the citation be issued retroactively. Each time it has been moved back in the queue. I looked at her. Okay. I am telling you this, she said, not because I believe it will happen. I do not know if it will happen. I am telling you because I want you to know it has been tried, that someone has been trying. There was something in that sentence that I filed away carefully. The way you file something you're going to retrieve later, when you're alone and have time to look at it properly. Well, I said, that's something. And I meant it. The general ordered coffee. Real coffee, or as real as it gets on a station 40 light years from the nearest coffee farm. She flagged the atrium attendant and spoke briefly, and the attendant nodded and returned in 3 minutes with 2 cups that steamed correctly and smelled almost exactly like the genuine article. That detail cost something, that she knew to order it, that she'd done the reading or the learning or whatever it was that generals with 32 years in the field did when they decided someone was worth learning about. I picked up the cup and held it. The warmth moved through my hands in the specific way warmth does when you've been cold for a while and haven't admitted it. Oak Haven Township, the general said. I looked at her. Your mission documentation lists an Oak Haven Township in the Tennessee Valley region as the originating authority for this procurement. Yeah, population approximately 8,000, thereabouts. They sent 1 person, she said. They sent the right number, I said. She wrapped her hands around her cup and looked at me with the expression of someone assembling a picture from pieces and finding it more coherent than expected. Tell me about Oak Haven, she said. I thought about Oak Haven. 8,000 people in a valley that had once been a mining hub, then had been something else, then had reorganized itself around what it could grow, and what it could trade, and what it could build with available materials. The water filtration plant had been constructed in the early settlement years, when Earth was first consolidating its resource infrastructure after the expansion conflict. It was a good system. It was old now. And good, old systems eventually need new parts. They grow a lot of grain, I said. They manufacture filtration membranes they trade with 4 other townships. The water system serves the whole valley, about 15,000 people across the full network, and the system is failing. The housing joints on the primary filtration units are degrading. We've been running on replacement parts from 2 other decommissioned systems. We're out of replacement parts. So you came here. The specific housing design isn't manufactured on Earth anymore. The manufacturer is Velian. Kessler Station is the nearest authorized distribution point. The general looked at her coffee. You came 40 light years to buy water filtration parts. Yeah. And the station's customs officer called you disposable goods. He did. And adolescents photographed your coat. They did. And one of my lieutenants spent a notable amount of effort making himself look important at your expense. He did, I said. And your response to all of that, she said, was to continue acquiring your filtration components. I had a list, I said. The general looked at me for a moment. Then she said, that is the most expeditionary thing I have ever heard. I didn't have an answer for that, so I drank my coffee. It was good. Not quite right, but close. Close enough that some part of me that had been running at low-frequency tension for the last 20 hours settled fractionally. The general drank hers. The atrium continued its business around us at a respectful distance. Someone had apparently communicated to the space that the general's table wasn't a table you approached right now, the silent efficiency of well-run stations. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. You recognize the coat. You knew the 4th Expeditionary. Most people don't. Most people didn't do what I did after the reach, she said. Which was? She set her cup down with the care of someone placing something precisely. I went back to the records when communications re-established, when the reports came in. When we understood the perimeter had been held after our withdrawal. She paused. I read everything, every unit report, every personal testimony, every piece of documentation available. Why? Because I made the tactical call to withdraw at hour 7, she said. I was the senior Kell officer on the perimeter operation. The order to pull our forces back to secondary positions was mine. The atrium was quiet at our table. It was the correct call, she said, with the information we had. I have had 5 years to revisit that assessment, and I have not changed it. With what we knew at hour 7, withdrawal was right. Her jaw tightened slightly. What was not right was that we didn't know the full picture. That we didn't know your unit was still operational. That we withdrew and filed our reports and moved forward without going back to verify what we'd left behind. I held my cup. You didn't leave us behind, I said. The comm went down. You didn't know. No, she said, but we should have gone back after the signal re-established. After we knew. We should have sent a formal acknowledgement, a formal relief, a formal anything. Instead, we sent a standard debriefing request through standard channels. And then there was a political transition, and then there were budget allocations, and then the Reach operation was filed as a closed engagement and moved to archive. She looked at the coat. You were moved to archive, she said, while you were still standing in the field. That sentence went through me at a particular angle. Not painful. It was 5 years old, and I'd made a kind of peace with its shape. But hearing it spoken aloud in those exact words by someone who understood precisely what she was saying had a quality I hadn't been prepared for. I looked at the window. The freighter that had been docking earlier was in its berth now, settled, connected, the mechanical arms doing their slow, patient work. Elena Vasquez opened a bakery, I said. The general looked at me. One of the 7, I said. She came back and started a bakery in Portland, makes bread. People drive 2 hours to buy it. And the others? David Okonkwo teaches emergency field medicine at a training facility in Edmonton. Maria Rivera does maintenance work on Earth's outer relay stations. James Kim married someone from his hometown and coaches youth soccer on Saturdays. I paused. Marcus Webb runs a small engineering firm. He designs water systems, irrigation, filtration, distribution networks. He's the one who identified the specific components I needed today. Marcus Webb designed the procurement list for Oak Haven Township. He did, and you carried it here. He couldn't make the trip. His youngest just started school, and there's a school event this week he didn't want to miss. The general sat with that information for a moment. 7 people who held an undefended perimeter for 11 hours, she said slowly. And afterward, 1 makes bread. 1 teaches medicine. 1 maintains relay stations. 1 coaches children. 1 designs the water systems that supply 15,000 people. And 1 is carrying those designs' components across 40 light years. Yeah, I said. That's what you did with it, she said. I thought about how to explain that there wasn't a did with it. There wasn't a decision made after the reach that said, now I will do meaningful things to justify surviving. You just go home and you do the thing in front of you, and then the thing after that, and eventually you look up and you're somewhere. There's not a lot of ceremony to it. You just keep going, I said. Yes, she said. I imagine that's exactly what it is. She finished her coffee. I finished mine. Outside, another ship was coming in, a freighter class moving with the efficiency of something that had somewhere specific to be. I want to say something formally, the general said. I waited. On behalf of the Kel 2nd Command Division, and in my capacity as the senior officer of the perimeter operation at the Reach, I formally acknowledge the conduct and sacrifice of the 4th Expeditionary Earth Defense Corps unit at the Reach perimeter. She sat straight, eyes on me, every word exactly placed. You held the line. All of you. You held it when you had no communication, no support, and no certainty that the line meant anything anymore. You held it because the people behind it were worth holding it for. That was seen. That will be recorded. I am sorry it took this long to say so. The atrium was very still. The acknowledgement landed the way real things land. Not dramatically. It settled in and took up the space it was owed and sat there. I looked at the general. She was looking back at me with the steady eyes of someone who has delivered difficult things in difficult situations and knows the difference between when the delivery is over And when the receipt has happened. The 7 of us, I said. We don't really talk about it, the reach. We see each other sometimes. Marcus and James have coffee on the first Sunday of every month. I call Maria when the relay schedules bring her near Earth's inner ring. But we don't have meetings about what we did. We don't have ceremonies. No, she said. It's not that we're avoiding it, I said. It's just that we went back to the world. The world was there. It needed things. It needed water filtration components, she said. Today it did. Yeah, it. She smiled. It was small and brief and had something in it I didn't have a clean word for. Not pity. Not exactly admiration. Something more like recognition. The specific recognition of one person who has been in the field by another. Sergeant Major, she said, using the rank I hadn't announced, hadn't worn, hadn't carried on any documentation this trip. She had it from the records. She'd done the reading thoroughly. Nora Cross, 4th Expeditionary Sergeant Major, date of separation from active service. Retired, I said. Retired, she agreed. And buying water parts. She stood, gathered herself with the economy of movement of someone who has stood from tables in difficult rooms many times and has the physical language of it entirely sorted. Sergeant Major Cross, she said. I looked up at her. Earth is fortunate, she said, that it sends people like you. I thought about the 7 of us. Elena's bread, Marcus's blueprints, James's Saturday mornings on a soccer field, David in a training facility teaching young medics to keep their hands steady, Maria out in the relay stations with her toolkit and her patience, Rivera, Maria, with her left-handed stitching, and me here with a bag of filtration components and a 2-hour window before departure. We're not that special, I said. Earth has a lot of people. Most of them are doing something. The ones who aren't are working on it. She looked at me for a long moment. No, she said. You're not special. You're exactly what you should be. That's the impressive part. I didn't have an answer to that. She didn't need one. Safe travels, General, I said. Safe travels, Sergeant Major. She walked away with that same deliberate weight that had announced her arrival. The atrium redistributed around her. Her aide fell in beside her, the still extended datapad finally accepted. I sat at the table for a while. The window showed the outer dock, ships coming and going. The machinery of a galaxy doing what it does, which is continue. I picked up my bag. The weight of it was exactly right. 6 filtration components for a water system serving 15,000 people across a valley in Tennessee. Marcus's specifications, my procurement, everyone else's need. I stood. Checked my departure time. 55 minutes. I thought about what the general had said, that it would be recorded, that someone had been trying these 5 years to get the recognition processed. I thought about the queue it was sitting in. I thought about the political transitions and the budget cycles and the long, patient crawl of institutional acknowledgement. I thought, well, that's something. And it was. It genuinely was. Not because recognition matters more than what was done, not because what was done required an audience to be real, but because she had come back to the records, and she had learned the names, and she had made the recommendations, and she had sat across from me in a station atrium and said the words precisely and meant them. That counted. Quiet things that are real count. I put on my bag, walked to the door of the atrium. At the threshold I paused, not long, just the length of a breath, and looked back at the station. All of it. The promenade where 5 adolescents had grabbed a sleeve and found it attached to something they didn't have the context to understand. The customs hall where a scanner had flagged the code as damaged goods. The table where a general had read a scorch mark correctly for the first time in 5 years. 40 light years from Oak Haven Township. 40 light years from 8,000 people who needed clean water. I adjusted the coat. The right sleeve settled at the shoulder the way it always did. Slightly off, the seam visible. Rivera's left-handed stitching. Fast and precise and good under conditions that didn't reward slowness. I had everything I came for. The docking corridor was 3 lefts and a straight run to berth 32. I knew the layout from the morning's arrival the way I know the layout of any space I've been in, automatically, without trying. I walked it. The station moved around me. Commerce and noise and 100 species going about their business in the particular urgency of creatures who have places to be. No one stopped me. A few looked at the coat, the way they'd been looking at it since I arrived. But the texture of the looking had changed. Or maybe my awareness of it had changed. Or maybe nothing had changed at all, and it was just a coat on a person walking to a departure gate with a bag of water filtration components and a return ticket to Earth. I found berth 32. Found my seat. Put the bag in the overhead compartment with careful attention. 6 items properly secured, ready for transit. I sat down. The departure sequence started. The usual sounds: pressure equalization, engine warm-up, the mechanical throat clearing of a ship preparing to do the thing it was built to do. Through the small port window, I could see the station's exterior lights. Kessler Station, 40 light-years out. A place I'd come to get water parts and had gotten something else additionally, which happened sometimes when you went places. The ship moved. Kessler Station fell away. Space, which has the quality of being simultaneously enormous and quiet, took its usual position in the window. I thought about 8,000 people in a valley in Tennessee waking up tomorrow, drinking water that would continue to run clean because of the 6 items in the overhead compartment. I thought about Marcus designing those specs at his kitchen table, probably with his youngest underfoot asking questions. I thought about the school event that had kept him home, and how that event mattered, and how the filtration components mattered, and how both things were real and both things were worth the trip required. I thought about a general sitting with records she'd gone back to read, making recommendations that kept getting moved down a queue, because that was the kind of thing some people did with the things they couldn't change. They kept trying anyway. I thought about a scorch mark on a shoulder, about the reach at hour 8, about the particular quality of the moment when you decide something matters and hold on to it without being entirely certain why, except that the alternative is worse. I didn't think about Marcus or Elena or Sarah or David or Rivera or James for very long because that's not something I do in transit. I save it for land, for still rooms, for mornings when there's time to let it come and go properly. The coat was in my lap. I'd taken it off for the seat the way you do, and it was folded over my knees with the shoulder facing up. The scorch mark was there. The stitching was there. The empty spaces were there. I put my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. 7 hours to the Earth transit point, plenty of time. For the ones who hold the line. Subscribe to Ascension of Man.